Welcome, everyone, to the new and improved Verdict series. My name is Matt Watkins, and I'm your host. The Verdict is one such feature of our new service called RockM Plus. For my money, it's the best Mizzou basketball coverage you'll find on the World Wide Web. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and hit that subscribe button to get all of our podcasts. Tonight, we're going to do a little bit something different. We get into the weeds a little bit on a lot of breakdowns, film, data, what have you. But instead tonight, I'm joined by a guest, Jim Root. If you've been around college basketball circles for a while, you've probably seen him, and I'll read off his list of accomplishments and affiliations. He is a contributor to The Athletic, Three-Man Weave, which is his own baby, Burner Ball, Action Network, and he was even a special guest on our 2022 Coach Search Bracket, which brought us Dennis Gates. He served as the final word in any disputes between the staff and the fans as to who we would choose. And best yet, he's one of Mizzou's favored sons. Jim, how are you doing?
I'm great, Matt. I appreciate you having me. It's good to have the Mizzou flag actually feature correctly on a show for once where it belongs. But yeah, look at us, two guys on Valentine's Day night. I'm sure everybody is, busy out there with their big plans. But you said you've got family traveling. I'm a single guy. I'd rather talk basketball anyways.
Well, the irony is not lost on me that I usually do these alone, and tonight I have a guest, and it is Valentine's Day. So, in a purely platonic Mizzou love sort of way, here we are talking Mizzou hoops on a Friday night. So, Jim, before we get into this, tell me just very briefly how you got into basketball coverage.
Yeah, I was kind of a basketball nut from day one, just playing it and watching it as a kid. And then fast forward to professional world, and I'm sitting there in offices all the time, getting kind of bored and needing a creative outlet. So two of my friends and I started Three-Man Weave. One of them is Kai McEwen. He's another Mizzou grad. So 2/3 Mizzou flavor there, a power majority whenever we're voting on things. But yeah, we started the website as just kind of a hobby. Let's write about all kinds of teams. We love college basketball. It's an outlet. We won't annoy our friends anymore talking about it. We'll just put it in words and let the internet deal with it. And then a year later, we started a podcast. I moved up to Chicago where both Matt and Kai were. So we were able to do the podcast in person before COVID all came along. We kind of got that figured out. And yeah, the hobby eventually evolved a little bit into a part-time job. And then I quit and moved to Las Vegas and tried to go full-time job. And it's still sort of an effort to get it there. But yeah, I've been writing about basketball for a decade now. It feels wild to say that. And Pod's been going for 8 or 9 years. And yeah, we've carved out our little niche in the college basketball world.
Yeah, that's great to hear. You've done great work, and you've managed to find yourself under one of the largest shadow figures in college basketball, Trilly Donovan.
Yes.
How is that going?
Oh, it's wonderful. Some of the meetings we've had with him over Zoom where, he's got the no picture and he doesn't quite do voice modulation, but he's at least anonymous enough that we can't pick up on the tone of his voice. But he's been awesome to work with, just a delightful guy. And really, he wants to cover the sport. He wants to spread more love for college basketball and get more people into it. And that's really what it all comes down to. Some of the personalities you see covering college basketball, some you could see have pure passion for it. John Fanta, I think, is maybe the best example of that. And some it's just, a job. They're checking a box. And I gravitate more towards the people with love for it. And Trilly's definitely got that, even though he is a mysterious, shrouded, dark figure with an anonymous identity.
Well, I'll put a plug in for Burner Ball. If you all haven't subscribed, I recommend you do it. Basketball recruiting coverage is hard now. Everything is so social media oriented. You've got several guys who have a lockdown on all of the inside intel. Coaches don't talk. They wait for the graphics to come up. If there's anyone out there who knows the inside intel on college basketball recruiting, you're going to find it at Burner Ball.
Yeah, absolutely. For anyone not doing Photoshops, Trilly's as connected as it gets.
Tipton excluded.
Yes, exactly.
So, Jim, you were at Mizzou and cut your teeth on the college basketball scene during the Mike Anderson era. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. When I got there, well, I visited the campus during my junior year, the night that Kalen Grimes hit somebody in the head with a shotgun butt. That was my first real true impression from Mizzou hoops. I'm from Wisconsin originally, and clearly that got me. That hooked me at the end of the Quinn Snyder era. But yeah, we had a really good run while I was in school with Mike Anderson. Freshman years when they made the Elite Eight.
Mhm.
That's how you really imprint a fandom on somebody. And then senior year was the disastrous first round loss to Norfolk State. So I had the joys and the heartache both at bookending my college career, but I enjoyed it. I got to see some really, really great games at Mizzou Arena, and hopefully many more to come.
We passed each other on our time at Mizzou. I was leaving Mizzou grad school at the time that you showed up. The 2009 season, the Elite Eight season, was my last year in Columbia. So, I got a little bit more Quinn Snyder, but I did get a little bit better football, I would say, with the Chase Daniel era. So, but we're not here to talk about that. That leads me to a pretty natural segue. The Mizzou basketball team this year is probably seeing some of their best basketball being played since the Mike Anderson era or the very, very first year with Frank Haith. So, Jim, what are your impressions on what you've seen from Mizzou so far this year?
I've enjoyed it. It's kind of a refreshing thing to see. I think you might have tweeted it last night or 2 nights ago. Mizzou in the top 20 of KenPom for the first time in who knows how long. I didn't actually go back and look it up, but they seem to enjoy playing together. Some of the interviews they do at the end of games where they all buddy up and huddle up and kind of support each other, whether it's a guy that played a lot in the game or a guy that didn't. That's always nice to see. It's a team that's easy to follow and easy to root for. It's a little like what I mentioned with broadcasters. Like if they're enjoying themselves on the court, I can enjoy myself as a fan. They're solid on both ends. It's kind of a tough team to play against because sometimes they're just attacking you one-on-one. And I don't know how you really prepare for that other than just telling guys to get in a stance and figure it out. But yeah, between kind of the shooting that they have, the physicality we're starting to see, I mean, boy, they took it to Florida on the road. They took it to Oklahoma this week at home, and seeing that relative to the last 2 years when they couldn't grab a defensive rebound, it's been refreshing. So I have enjoyed the Tigers this year, and I have fairly high hopes for what they're capable of doing as we continue going through the stretch here.
So it was about, a year ago. I don't remember the exact record at this point on Valentine's Day a year ago. I can tell you they were in the midst of a 19-game losing streak. How surprising is it for you to see, even in this new age with NIL, transfer portal, rosters changing over from one year to the next, how surprised are you to see the turnaround that they've had?
I'm pretty surprised. I'd scale 1 to 10, maybe 7 or 8. Coming into the year, we do a top 50 for 3-man weave. We tweet out a countdown. And I was kind of wanting to put them in the back end of that around 50th. Like I saw the vision with, bigger guards and mismatches and playing Mark Mitchell at the 5 and some small ball stuff. Like, hey, there's potential here. There's a lot of pedigree on the roster. But man, it was hard to wash away the stink of 0-19. And anybody that saw, you're ranking the team that went 0-19 in the top 50, you're just that's just all bias. You don't know what you're talking about. So it's hard to stand on that hill in the preseason, but they've legitimized that, and I'm surprised how well they've played. The Florida game was the first one that really I was like, wow, okay, they went on the road to a hostile environment team that's probably in line for a 1 seed right now, and basically led wire to wire. So to get to that level, not just back into the bubble mix, but 5 seed, 6 seed type of range right now with plenty of upside for more. I'm pretty shocked at just how quickly it's been turned around.
This might be the toughest question I have to ask you about the team. I don't know that I can answer it. Who would you consider to be the most valuable player on this Mizzou basketball team?
That is a great question. I think I'm going to go Caleb Grill, just both from the shooting aspect and just kind of like an attitude. He's kind of an MFer. Like you can't mess with this guy. I think last year losing him, just the kind of like the tenacity on the boards for a guard, and if somebody's going to cut by him, he'll take it in the chest. Like he willingly embraces contact. He seeks it out despite being a shooter. Most of the times you think of that kind of guy as just being somebody that floats. He doesn't float. He'll get in there. He'll get in the mix. And I think sometimes that rubs opponents the wrong way. But when he's on your team, it's great. It's great to have that kind of guy in your locker room. And I know he's coming off the bench, but just the spark he brings and the attitude he brings, the confidence he kind of seems to convey into others. I'll put him narrowly above Mitchell because Mitchell unlocks so many different lineups with what he can do, but I'll go with Grill.
I think that's a good answer. And, I'm not sure if I agree with it, but I'm not sure if I disagree with it. The thing about this Mizzou team is it's kind of you could say it's a knock that they don't have a guy, that the guy you circle. They don't have a Janai Broom or a Cooper Flag. Obviously, most teams don't have them, but in that vein where you have the go-to guy that's getting the ball in the big moments and it's going there. On the other hand, when we look back at last year, Caleb Grill was out, John Tonje was out, and we talked about, both you and I and generally, that Mizzou was missing those guys, but we didn't really know what they were missing. And, we have a Wisconsin connection because my wife went to the University of Wisconsin, you being from there.
Okay.
These guys, they're really good. These are good players. So when you look at last year in context, these guys were out for basically the entirety of the conference schedule. Would they have been a tournament team? I don't know, but they're good players.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got the Wisconsin connection too. I grew up with a bunch of guys that went to Wisconsin, still have a group chat with all my Packers fan buddies, and they're Wisconsin basketball fans. They're like, Jim, who's Tonje? Who's this guy that's from Mizzou? Why weren't you guys good with him last year? I was like, because he didn't play. He was a shell of himself the couple times he got out there. And yeah, you add him. And like I said, with Grill, they won at Pitt last year. They won at Minnesota, and he was important with his attitude in both those games and just kind of setting the tone. So it does give quite of a what if vibe if you get 35 healthy games from both of those guys last year. But, the glass half full is that we get a full season of Caleb Grill this year, and we wouldn't have had that. So silver lining in the 0-19 cloud for sure.
And it's worked to Wisconsin's benefit as well, having John Tonje this year where they otherwise wouldn't have. So, talking about this Mizzou team, when you look at them, tournament play is a different animal. But what is one thing that you like about this team that you could see them going deep because of that reason?
I think it's just the general ball pressure and on-ball defense that Robinson provides, Perkins provides, T.O. Barrett's starting to give you some of it. Grill will fight. Bates is a fighter now too. Like, I think the fact that they can make teams uncomfortable, and not just in man-to-man when they switch defenses. I like that Gates does that a lot. I preach that constantly on 3-Man Weave shows is change defenses, throw a curveball, make them off balance. I think that's a huge deal. And then just in a tournament setting, you can't really prepare for a team that attacks mismatches the way that Mizzou does. I think that was always a big thing for Musselman teams with them advancing through the tournament was, all right, we're going to find your weakest defender. We're going to attack you with a guy that can score off the bounce, and you're going to have to deal with that and figure it out. Maybe you're going to have to double, and that opens up shooters, or you're going to let a guy get to the line a bunch. And that's not something you can, sit down in a scouting report and say, all right, we've got to take this screen away, this cutaway. It's a guy lining up across from him and being better than him. And I think that having, while not the one guy that can do it, they've got a bunch of different guys that can. Mm-hmm. And that's almost harder to guard because you don't know really where to focus your defensive efforts. So that balance and then, the ball pressure defensively, I think project really well for the postseason.
Yeah, I think it was the year that they being Arkansas knocked off Gonzaga in the Sweet 16 when in the second half of that game, it was like 10, 15 possessions in a row. Arkansas ran the exact same action every time down the court, and Gonzaga couldn't stop it. And that's people like to say, well, X's and O's, all this, that, and the other. It's about finding matchups that you like and exploiting that. These guys are all good players. You don't have to run really high intellect sets to get a Kobe Brown, for example, to bury a guy in the post or to drive by a bigger man. It's about one-on-one basketball a lot of times. And I think you're right when you get into tournament play, especially with those short turnarounds on the, if you have one day to prepare for a team, if you've won your first game on that weekend, that, Bill Self has struggled with that. He's a great prep coach, but that second game of the weekend has always been a bugaboo because you don't have the time to put in all this stuff for the second team. So I think that's a good point. Now, flipping that, if there's one area that causes you concern about Mizzou's ability to go deep or even win a game, what would it be?
Probably say kind of flip side of that, just some of the reliance on, needing transition as a lifeline to offense. Sometimes the half court does get stagnant. If you're playing teams that can D up at, 4 or 5 of the positions where you're not just going to be able to pick on somebody, it can really get a little bit tough for them to create good shots. They're not getting somebody downhill off the bounce and bending the defense, getting drive and kick and forcing rotation. Some longer possessions with some deep threes, and you don't know if Caleb Grill's going to go 6 of 10 with one of his shots with his heels on the logo at half court. Sometimes you got to get easier baskets than that. And I think certain teams do a better job of taking that away. Now, perhaps that's a bigger problem later in the tournament as you're getting teams that are more capable of doing that. But early on, hopefully what they have, the strengths they have are enough to get by to second round and cross your fingers, a Sweet 16. I just do sometimes worry that the half court is a little too reliant on that one-on-one. And if it's not working, what's plan B? That's my biggest concern.
Fair enough. Moving away from Mizzou just a little bit, we can still talk about them because I know that's why you're here. You got your flag ready and everything. Talking about the SEC, state of the league. Is this the best league that you've seen since you've started covering college basketball?
Yes, 100%. Like it's ridiculous, top to bottom. Going through the non-conference and seeing the performance of basically everyone. The buffer that a lot of the teams have, like Oklahoma, they're at 3-8 in conference and still be like a 10 seed in the league because of what they accomplished in the non-con, and the fact that there are 4 teams in the mix for a 1 seed, and Texas A&M's right there is probably the 6th or 7th or 8th best resume in the entire country too. It's outrageous the amount of depth plus top end talent. You kind of feel for South Carolina, Matt, because they're having the 2024 Mizzou season, but they're better than Mizzou was last year. And they're winless in conference. They're trying to battle night to night and just coming up short, but they're up against it with how good the league is, how deep it is. No easy games. And I was kind of going through it, looking at some of the bubble teams like Georgia and Arkansas and Oklahoma and the schedules they have coming up. It's like, yeah, there's no days off. And yes, that gives you a lot of opportunities for big wins, but it can also add up the loss column pretty quickly. And I think the league might not get the 13 or whatever it's hoping at large. It's just because of that. There's getting a little bit of a separation with the bubble squads.
So if you had to pick a team, and we'll set Mizzou aside for a moment here. If you had to set Mizzou aside, which team in the SEC have you been most surprised by in a positive way?
A positive surprise. It might be Ole Miss. I kind of thought they'd be in that 10 or 11 mix. I didn't think they'd be able to play defense. Just looking at the players, throwing Chris Beard and Mark Adams aside on the sideline, great guys on that end. They're smallish. They've got guards that I thought could get beat off the bounce. Padua and Jalen Murray. They've got 3 guys back from last year, a team that could not play any defense. Morrell, Brakefield, and Murray. I was like, all right, none of those guys are good defenders. They don't have a shot blocker. And here they are, top 20 defense. They won at Alabama. That's been really impressive to me. I mean, Vandy, you could probably throw in there given the full roster reset they had to undergo. But just what I expected Ole Miss's defense to be a huge weakness, and instead it's their strength, and they still have a top 30 offense too. They're basically a lock for the tournament already. I'll put them right there next to Mizzou because I think they've had similar trajectories from preseason assessments to where they've gotten to now.
And I think you see Ole Miss and Mizzou pretty close on a lot of NCAA tournament seeding projections. I know I have them within a seed line of each other seemingly every week. They played once. It was at Mizzou. Mizzou got the win, but I believe Ole Miss was without Dre Davis to the extent that that could have impacted the outcome. But Mizzou pretty handily won that game after going down 8-0 early on. I think they were plus 15, 16 the rest of the game. But I would agree. Ole Miss, to me, was kind of hard to slot in the preseason because you look at, they brought in new talent, but a lot of their core guys were from teams that just weren't all that great. Matt Morrell, Jamin Brakefield, Jalen Murray. They're good players. They'd been together and hadn't done it before. So in the same way that Tamar Bates and Caleb Grill, you had questions about it, I think. And I would agree. They've put on a pretty good show this year. They had a little bit of a rough stretch there, but other than that, they've been playing well. So we're going to flip it around. Which team has been the most disappointing? Again, understanding we're just over halfway through the league slate, but you can include non-conference in that.
Yeah, Arkansas is probably the answer, given that I expected them to be right around Kentucky. Mississippi State, I think, could maybe get a little bit of shade for how they've been lately, but I'll go with Arkansas. The talent is a little better than where it's at right now, and maybe this Boogie Fland injury and the fact that they've trended up since then with Nelly Davis taking a more alpha role. Mm-hmm. This is the better version of the team. We're going to find out. I mean, they've got a heck of a schedule coming up at A&M. I think they're at Auburn after that, and then Mizzou coming to town could potentially put the death knell in there. At-large hopes, we'll see. But yeah, I don't feel like they've looked cohesive for most of the year. It's getting a little better, but the young guys haven't meshed with the older guys, and the X and O stuff has always been a little bit of a gripe of mine with Calipari. And the big problem I had with him this year is that the offense was so great last year and fun to watch, and the guy that sculpted all that, the architect, he let run to Fresno State, be associate head coach, and brought back Kenny Payne, the head of the worst power conference team we've seen probably in my lifetime. So I didn't love that.
That's a high standard, the worst. Because we've seen some bad teams at Mizzou. And
I'm submitted
not saying anything bad about it, but Kenny Payne at Louisville was worse, as hard as that is to believe.
Yes, it was real bad. So yeah, I thought what Arkansas could be is so much better than what they've shown, and maybe they'll get to the NCAA tournament now with the trend, the way they're playing. But if they don't, I think that's a massive disappointment given what they paid for their roster, what they paid for their coach, and the talent that's right there.
I think that I would have probably agree with that too. You could probably go with Mississippi State, at least if you isolate it to conference play, because their defense has really taken a step back. Their offense is more fun. They're more enjoyable to watch.
Yes.
But that defense, I mean, what Mizzou did to them in Starkville, I'm sure Chris Jans had several sleepless nights over that, and it's not been just Mizzou. They're more down around 50th in defensive efficiency. So, there's a couple teams to pick, and Tennessee is starting to slide a little bit in conference play, but I mean they're still looking at a 2 seed, so how can you really say that's disappointing? But we'll let that answer stand and move on. Which team of the SEC or from the SEC do you think has the potential to go the deepest in the tournament? Which team do you think is most likely to reach a Final Four, or maybe even a national championship?
Yeah, we got quite a selection to pick from at the top of this conference. I guess I'll go with the boring answer. Just I've been a big believer in Auburn all season. They were my preseason title pick, and I haven't seen a lot to knock me off of that take. The offense is outrageous. The Athletic had a great, I didn't write it, so this is not a plug for me, a great write-up on their offensive coordinator, Mike Burgomaster, a young 30-year-old guy, just blending a bunch of different X and O principles, some flex stuff to go with playing through the bigs a lot and using the passing of their big men to unlock the guards. That team has been really fun, and I think the defense has a pretty high ceiling too. It hasn't been amazing lately. They got kind of thrashed by Florida, but the fact that they can play on both ends, they have rim protection with Cardwell and Broom. Chaney Johnson's starting to look really good as kind of a switchable destroyer. You just have to worry about the Chad Baker-Mazzara implosions, and he has had a few of them in his career at his 4 or 5 different schools. And so I take them slightly above Alabama as we head into the weekend where those two are going to play, number one versus number two. A little bit ahead of Florida given the Gators injuries, and just not a huge believer in Tennessee's offense. I don't think they have enough dribble penetration to give teams enough headaches going through the NCAA tournament. So I will go with Auburn. I'll be boring and stick with that preseason title pick.
I think that's a very fair answer. You know, my biggest question about them is they were an absolute death machine prior to Broom's injury. Since he's come back, they're winning, but they haven't quite been at that level. And I think part of that's owed to him, which I saw your tweet right before we got on here, that his performance has dropped off a little bit, which is understandable because it was a pretty significant ankle injury. So how he comes back from that, I think, will be big.
Yeah, he came back quicker than I expected. You know, when he went down and just pointed at it, I thought he had like heard a pop, and we're talking fractured ankle. He doesn't return. So to only miss 2 games, I think, is a credit to him wanting to battle back. But it does seem like he's missing some bursts, some balance. The footwork's not quite there. The tweet was in the games before the injury, something like 15 or 16. He had 2 games shooting below 50% from 2. And since coming back, 5 of his 6 are below 50% from 2. So the finishing isn't quite there. Maybe teams are able to push him around a little bit on the block. Maybe they're sending him different doubles type of coverage. And you've seen some other guys thrive. But yeah, he hasn't quite been the go-to, I need a bucket, just give it to Broom and let him work. That's been kind of a bad offensive ploy at this point. So they need him back to full strength to get to their peak level.
So while we're on the topic, Auburn, Alabama tomorrow, 1 versus 2. And I guess the coaches poll has it Alabama at number 1 for some reason.
I didn't even know that. I hadn't seen the coaches poll.
Unbeknownst to me, I believe they're 1 and 2, but switched in the polls. Who are you liking that game?
I'm stubbornly going to go with Auburn. I know they're on the road, and that's terrifying to me. But I still think they've got an extra gear, and I think the paint is where they can really win that game. If Alabama has to play Omori like 25, 30 minutes, their spacing suffers and that, you know, the offense comes down a little bit. I think Auburn's going to play him off the court a little bit, and Alabama's going to be a little bit more 5 out offensively, have more space without Cliff. But that just means Cardwell and Broom can really go to work at the rim. I was writing up a preview for this for Action Network, actually. A little plug, always be plugging. And opponents... Yeah, of course. Opponents are shooting under 50% at the rim when Omori plays. And when he's off, it goes up to 57%, which isn't bad, really. But it just shows the difference that they need him for their defense to look as good as it can. And if the offense suffers and they need to really score with Auburn in an up and down game, I mean, it's a super high point total. It should be a track meet. I think Auburn pulls it out, but that's famous last words because Coleman's going to be lit up. It's going to be a great environment, and the home team has typically won this matchup.
And this starts off a stretch of just brutal games for Alabama. I mean, that slate, what did they have? Like every game that they have remaining is against teams in the top 30. I believe the net. I mean, that's absurd. That's 8 games of just and 2 with number 1 against Auburn. So, you know, this is life in the SEC. Okay, you get a little bit of a head start because you play the softer end of the schedule, which are still tournament teams, and then you get top 6 seeds the rest of the way. You know, I just go back to this league and how there are no nights off, and it's not only there's no night off, it's you're playing really freaking good teams every night.
Yep. Yeah, I don't envy. Just like, all right, we've had these 2 big road wins. Let's get back home and let's check who we're playing. Oh, it's Tennessee's coming to town to wage war on us in the paint, or Texas A&M's going to beat us up with billy clubs in the paint. Like, it's not fun, and there's different styles. You know, some of the teams are getting up and down, some are more physical, and you just have to be on it every single night. And to tie it back to Mizzou, it's nice to have a veteran team, or at least a team with a lot of veterans to help the young guys kind of stay the course. Don't get too high, don't get too low. I think that's important in a league like this because it can snowball if you start playing poorly. And kind of eyeing Georgia and Oklahoma as teams that could do that. Georgia's really young. That's where you could kind of get in your own head and make each game more than it needs to be, and you turn that into a losing streak and falling out of the dance.
Yeah, we had looked this up several weeks ago, and Mizzou was the 13th team in the league to lose consecutive games or more in a row. And that was at the halfway point of the league season. There were 3 teams that had lost consecutive games, and that's Florida, Alabama, and Auburn. And I bet Alabama does at some point with their schedule. It's just not even a comment on them. It's just how ridiculous it is. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. So I guess to wrap up the SEC conversation, we asked you about the team that you thought had the best chance to go deepest. Of the better teams, we're talking like top half seeds, teams that'll be wearing their home colors the first weekend, or first game, I should say. Which of those teams do you think is most poised to be upset?
I won't take the easy way out because Mississippi State might still qualify. I'll say Tennessee. I just think their offense can end up a little too reliant on tough jumpers late in the shot clock. Ziegler's the only guy I really believe in to get in the paint off the bounce. It's not Lanier's game. It's not Jordan Gainey's game. Meshack, no one really he doesn't really scare anybody. People don't guard him as much on the perimeter. They don't have it's a lot of Gainey taking threes, Lanier taking threes, Milicic kind of trying to be the matchup guy. And the history for Barnes with getting upset early is there as well. Maybe this team's like last year and a little less prone to it because the offense is a little bit better, but they are very reliant on defense and they give up a ton of jumpers and no one's making them this year. And I think it's because they contest all of them and they're tough shots. But if a team makes a few jumpers, if Tennessee's losing, I think that's where they get into trouble because they could start having to chuck. And I know they came back on Mizzou rare, and I think that's trouble for the Vols. I think they're built to play from the front. So we'll see what happens early in the tournament.
And I will note in the game against Mizzou, they shot 66.7% from three-point range, which was over double their season average.
Yeah, still bitter about that one.
It was actually a topic of the last verdict about how jump shooting variance is a killer. And Mizzou suffered from it last week when they played 2 pretty good games all in all against Tennessee and at home against Texas A&M, probably the 2 most physical teams in the league back to back. And Mizzou just couldn't find their jump shot Saturday. And, I kind of owed it to the physicality and the short turnaround, but also in playing A&M, you've got so many things you got to worry about with rebounding, taking care of the ball, not getting your head knocked off, that shooting is still important, but it's not necessarily the primary thing you're thinking about. And I clipped 14 shots where they were good jumpers by good jump shooters that none of them fell. And if one of them does, the game probably goes differently. It's, that's what we're talking about here with Tennessee. They've got to make those shots. They often don't, but they need to. And I think, Milicic coming around lately has been a big thing for them, but still he is going to be having shots created for him and not creating his own. And there was some talk about Chaz Lanier being the new Dalton Knecht. Well, no, I heard it a lot this offseason, and I was probably one of the biggest skeptics on it. And I'll admit I was overly skeptical. He's been good, but he's not him. Those two are the same.
In conference play, he's been just I don't want to say just a guy. That's unfair, but he's nowhere near as efficient as Knecht. He can't elevate he doesn't have a first step. Like he's not going by anybody. So just not quite the same caliber of scoring package. He's the same caliber shooter, but not the same caliber scorer.
Good way to put it. So moving out of the SEC, and we're going to hit on just a couple points here before we wrap up on the NCAA field at large. Setting aside the SEC teams, what other teams are you looking at right now that you think are Final Four caliber teams across college basketball?
I remain stubborn on Houston. I think the Weave is probably like the most resolute Houston proponents in the national world. maybe there's a fun Discord kind of back and forth with a couple people in the burner where they're like, well, they're going to get hurt every year because they practice like insane people, and maybe to that, but at least now they seem a little bit healthier than they were 2 weeks ago. And to me, there's such a high floor with them. They win the shot volume so many nights a week because they get a lot of offense rebounds. They turn you over and don't turn it over as much. So I think they just kind of establish that floor. That's a team that's not really going to get upset. So I'll ride with Houston. The fact that they're actually a good jump shooting team this year, not just average. Maybe that's what gets them over the hump to get there. Man, I'm tempted to say St. John's is just another, almost Houston light, where they want to turn you over, they want to get in the offensive glass, but they are a horrific shooting team, unlike Houston. Duke is probably a good one to mention. They're not going to have to play in a road environment like they did at Clemson, and that one was probably good for them because everybody would always give Gonzaga and Houston guff when they're in the American and Gonzaga in the WCC of like, oh, they're not playing any close games. What are they going to do when they get to the tournament? Well, the ACC is like that bad right now. Duke is barely playing any close games, but I think it was good for them to get that loss. You have to kind of face down a more veteran opponent in a tough building. And I guess that would probably be if I went Final Four, Auburn, Duke, Houston. Yeah, Jim, real creative. The top three teams in KenPom. But then the team I loved since the beginning of the season is Texas Tech. I had them preseason Final Four, just a very versatile kind of team, can play different ways, can play big, can play small. They've got a bunch of shooters. The freshman Christian Anderson has emerged to the point that, gives him another scoring threat, another guy that can create his own shot. I was really impressed with him in the win against Arizona State. Went to double overtime. So that, I think that might have been, my preseason Final Four had Gonzaga instead of Duke, but I'll stand by with Auburn, Houston, Texas Tech, and sub in the Blue Devils, just given the high talent level.
Well, you're not the only Grant McCaslin fan on this two-man podcast. Speaking of the 2022 coach search bracket, that was my guy that I was pushing, for Mizzou to really look hard at after he was still at North Texas at the time, but he had won everywhere he'd been. He had coached junior college ball. He had won at the lower levels of D1. He did a really good job building his staff. And, being a good coach is part of it, but getting good guys to be alongside you is an even bigger part of it. And you look at the guys he's brought in with Jeff Linder, who he brought in from Wyoming, a former D1 coach and really a savant of offense if you break him down. But his staffs are always good. Ross Hodge has been great at North Texas, every bit as good as Grant McCaslin was there. So, you don't have to convince me on Texas Tech.
Perfect.
I'm a buyer. I don't know if Grant would have ever left Texas. He is a Texas guy, and he's spent his life there. But he was one that I was high on, and I'm proud to say that I was on his bandwagon back then. And I think he's doing great things. And I agree, Texas Tech, they can be a load. They dropped a tough one at Arizona, but other than that, have been playing really good basketball. So one other fun question to ask you about NCAA at large. Looking at some mid-major and low-major teams you really like. I'm asking right in your wheelhouse here. Give us two or three teams that you are going to point to now and can come back and later say, I told you so, when you see them springing upsets or even making a second weekend run.
Yeah, the first one I got to say is UC San Diego. They're up to a top 50 team in KenPom, so maybe the secret's getting out on them a little bit, but they are just fun. Like the ball movement, the offensive principles they run, like everybody can shoot. They mix in zone. They've got a point guard that's near the top of the country in steal rate. Their real linchpin is a 6'6" New Zealander that he kind of orchestrates everything. He can shoot a little bit, but he's great getting downhill. He's great finding people off the bounce. But really, whoever comes out of the Big West, if it's UC Irvine, if it happens to be Cal State Northridge, if it happens to be UC Riverside, like I have had so much fun staying up late and watching that conference this year. Whoever comes out of there would be a real threat, and UC San Diego is probably the favorite to do it right now. So that's one that I'll circle. I don't know if you tell me, does Drake count?
Yeah, I would say so. They're
Okay.
mid-major.
Yeah, anybody that's in St. Louis, get to Arch Madness, watch this team, and they're like they're just so methodical. They just slowly, the death by a thousand cuts a little bit. They basically played six guys. The coach is a total basketball savant, won a bunch of national titles at the Division II level in Missouri. Finally took the D1 job, brought four starters with, and just kind of kept rolling. Tied with Auburn for the best record in the entire country right now. I think they also set up well as an underdog because they play slow, take a lot of threes, just going to make that game real high variance. And hopefully their plan is to make less mistakes than you. The last one, I'll say it kind of surprised me coming into this year because I thought Princeton was going to be the class of the Ivy, but Yale, man, has been the best team in that league. James Jones has been there for 20 years now. I think he's number 2 all time in Ivy wins behind the legend Pete Carrill. But their offense has been outrageous. They've got a ton of shooters. They've got the defensive player of the year in the Ivy on ball. We talked about on ball defense with Mizzou. Their point guard, Bez Mbang, will ride you for 94 feet and make life miserable. And they've had tournament success under Jones before. That physical team that beat Baylor back a few years ago, or maybe 7 years ago or something now. I think they're going to be a fun one in the dance because of the offensive potency and then just great coach on the sideline.
And for you Mizzou fans who are listening, Jim just listed off a slew of potential 12 and 13 seeds. So when we're talking about Mizzou being a 4 or 5 or a 6 is probably more likely to get a play-in winner. But if you're in the 4 or 5 range, it's no guarantee you're winning that first game. Yeah, it's great to get up there, but would you rather be playing a Drake or a UC San Diego, or would you rather be playing Nebraska? Nothing against Nebraska, but these teams are as good as those teams, in my opinion, maybe even better. That you got to be careful what you wish for when you get there. That there are really good teams. When you get a little further down the pecking order, not so much. But yeah, I agree. Each of those teams, they've got some good talent. So last question. Favorite college basketball analyst?
Okay, for entertainment
talking head, whatever you want to call it.
Okay, Bill Raftery is the king, the GOAT for me. Just every game he's on, I'm having a good time. He's into it. I don't know how he's as sharp as he is. A quick side story: the first time I ever got media credentialed at a game was in Chicago for the CBS Sports Classic, and I had little business cards. I felt so professional walking in there. I was going to hand them to a couple people. I handed one to Raftery in the media dining room, and he just looked at me and was like, "I'm happy to talk to you. I don't know what you want me to do with this." So I was like, "You know what? Just throw it away. I just want to be able to say I gave it to you. You're the king." So I'll go with Raft, but then Robbie Hummel's coming up fast with just the analysis while also getting entertained and clearly loving the game, and the guy that was in it for a long time, sense of humor that he's got. So I think he's the one to carry the mantle to take over for Raft, who I hope lives forever and announces basketball forever. But those are the two very top of mind guys for me.
Great answers. So anyway, I think we'll end it there on a high note. We'd like to thank Jim for coming on and especially spending his Valentine's Day evening with yours truly. Again, if you missed it at the beginning, you can catch him at The Athletic, Burner Ball, Action Network, and 3-Man Weave. So with that being said, we're going to wrap it up. And Jim, thanks. Any final words?
No, not really. Go Tigers. Let's find a second weekend this year. It's been a while. It's time to get there.
I agree with that. All right. With that said, everyone stay in school.